embracing the elements in grounding. Like a good example of that is some veterans, they get a motorcycle because the wind on their face while they're driving overrides their thoughts. It's called wind therapy.
Look at that, a little gecko or a lizard.
That guy's blue. Look at him.
Yeah, he's got a nice color.
I've not seen one.
Yeah.
Maybe in the desert where you get the desert sage.
I might have seen one in the desert.
I think that's the other place. Those are usually desert plants. But another form would be like making and maintaining a fire and being in the presence of that heat and focusing on the light coming from it. Like that is also a very therapeutic thing that can get you in touch with that natural heartbeat. There's a few other things I can think of, like when people swim, they cold plunge or they hot spring or whatever, or they go into a lake. Whenever they're doing that, that's also very grounding because flowing water is living water, and stagnant, still water is dead water. Being in those environments definitely reacclimates your heart and your heartbeat.
You know, from a scientific perspective, it's very interesting. So, yeah, I'm not saying it's wrong. It's a different perspective for sure. But scientifically, when the water's dead, it holds the most life.
Yeah, technically, yeah, bacteria is single cell organisms are a form of life, but it's like the secret is like the tribes have been bringing all of the elements together in their ceremonies. I'm just giving you singular examples of something that they do all together at once. Like wind, water, fire, or earth. It's all part of the sweat lodge.
So you were raised Lakota, right?
Well, I was raised Nakota, and I was adopted by Lakota.
Okay.
I love the Lakota tradition because I went to New Mexico like 9 years ago, and I reunited with some family and met with a chief. I went into a sweat, and that sweat was the first time in my life that any of my indigenous language was understood by any human being. Because the Nakota language is considered a dead dialect, and the Lakota have a very similar language. So when they understood me, it was very reassuring that I was in the right place. It was like a lifelong waited affirmation that I'd made it home. And whenever I did that, that's whenever I started adopting traditional practices and ceremony. And since then, I've tried to live a more simple, sovereign life as a roadman. Just growing to traveling and doing what needs to be done.
So, I wanna ask you, and I wanna make sure y'all can hear them, right? But they probably can. I just always worry about that. But this is a deep question.
Yeah, I'm listening.
So, had arguments with other Marxists and other leftists who support different things, but really, I think one of the most important things we can do right now is think, what would a better future here look like?
Like in America?
Yeah, like in America.
Well, I think a better future would be embracing multiple forms of government that represent more direct. It's a more direct representation of the people.
Okay, and that's exactly my point, because people have called me a racist and all this because there's a strand of leftist thought that says all of this land should be given direct control of a native government or a coalition of native governments. And yeah, maybe white people can join, but the ultimate control should be theirs because it's their land. And I certainly sympathize with that view. But the fact is that there's so many people here who aren't native now we have to think what's the best for all the people here, and that's what I've said is, you know, the
Going back to the old way is unrealistic.
it is, but you know, the native nations that exist today can still be given more territory. There's a lot of unused land.
Yeah, they could be given. They could be appointed things that the government consider power. So it's like when they give a large quantity of land to a tribe, and the tribe is allowed to have more tribal council members, and they can get 501c3 grants to create things on that land through the tribe, the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It's like if they were to put the power in the hands of the indigenous people, I think that it would have already happened. But we've only had like Wi-Fi and like cellular devices and the internet for like 4 or 5 years now in South Dakota.
Wow.
So it's like in the time that we've had technology, we've already made a dictionary of all of our words in our language. We've made archives of all of our songs. We have the indigenous ledgers of history. So it's like there's so much more evidence and fact to work on than there is open-ended history or explanations with open-ended history. Because that's kind of like what happens with most of the tribes. It's like they're all open-handedly explained as like, and this is what they're doing now, and it's like what put them in that situation that is there now.
Yeah.
And it's like,
and I think reparations is something that we could incorporate. You know, in if we actually, as the people, had direct democracy or power to vote for these things, you know, reparations for descendants of black slaves and for indigenous people, you know, and also, you know, one of my ideas that I proposed that nobody else really leftists have commented on is that we set up a new socialist government where it's a union of workers from all the different sectors of labor, but we also have a three-step plan for decolonization, for indigenous empowerment, and that would look like number one, a certain percent of representatives are guaranteed to be filled by Native people by law, like maybe as low as 10 or 20%, but even as high as 30 or 40, whatever the people could decide. But just saying, okay, these are the people that are originally here. They deserve a certain amount of representation in the representatives, you know. And then the second one would be a body of government, a government organization. Like Congress makes organizations all the time. The different sectors of the government that deal with certain things. And there should be a section of the government that's exclusively run by indigenous people for indigenous affairs.
Well, that's just it. Is if they just put one of the things that already exist, that is that in the hands of the tribal entities. Yeah.
So there's stuff like that, but it's in the hands of the white people.
And 100%. That's what the Bureau of Indian Affairs is. The Bureau of Indian Affairs is who essentially took all the tribal land and made parks, national parks, wildlife preserves, wild habitats, preserve habitats, like all of those
because
things
you know what, a ranger here told me one time. We were at the up on the mountain, a national, you know, land or whatever. But he's like, well, this is actually this tribe's land, and they told me they don't want fires, so we're just telling you, you know.
Yeah.
But the rangers run it because it's officially owned by the federal government.
Yeah, exactly. Like all of the tribal land that has ever existed is like kind of leased out and given to the natives to borrow. So we kind of like borrow the land that our ancestors had while we're alive if we go through the process of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But it's so minuscule, the amount of land that they give you. It's all based on the size of your family, and the grants that you qualify for require a family of a certain size. So it's like a singular individual could not go to any reservation, prisoner of war camp. No one could go there and just build a house. Like they actually have to go through the Bureau of Indian Affairs and be allotted borrowed land. Even if they have like graves there, even if their ancestors had it for 200 years, 300 years. Like Fort Peck Wolf Mountain in Montana, the base of the glacier is where the Stony were, known as the Assiniboine, for like almost 180 years. By now it's 200 years. And it's like, that's where my family was kept in a prisoner of war camp. I'm the first person to see the ocean and the redwoods in California. I've traveled pretty much almost the whole United States except the East Coast because I refuse to go there. Have any of you ever seen Washington, D.C.?
I've been there.
If you've seen how many gun-toting militias there are out there, and you are an indigenous member, you would never want to go anywhere near Washington, D.C. Like, no way.
So this guy, Javi, says not Seminole Indians. He says the Seminole Indians are the only tribe that didn't sign an agreement with their Americans. I'm sure you probably know something about that.
Yeah. Oklahoma. Yeah, that's why all of them got allotted so much land and mineral rights in Oklahoma. That's how the whole Osage Massacre happened. And that essentially happened on most of those reservations that had rare earth minerals.
So they were given a lot of land and rights, but then they massacred them to take those.
They would marry into that family name and then kill the indigenous blood.
Wow. So white people would come and marry into the indigenous people who had rights to the land and then kill off the indigenous part of the family. Wow.
Yeah, that's why that movie got an Oscar. That was like an 8 to 10 year long process of making that movie.
What's the movie called?
Killers of the Blue Moon.
Killers of the Blue Moon.
Yeah, it's like the Osage Killer is like, there's basically Masons that were marrying into the indigenous families and then systematically killing off the women because they invented a treatment for what's that called when you can't process sugar, diabetes. They had a treatment from bovine. They took insulin from cattle and were giving it to the women, and it was demobilizing them. And they did that to millions of indigenous women, giving them bovine serum for what is that called? Diabetes. So their diabetes was a byproduct of their heavily processed commodity food that they were given generationally since the prisoner of war camp started. So me, on my time on the reservation, I learned that you could choose between having food stamps or you could continue receiving commodity. So commodities are heavily processed government food aid, I guess, that the tribes have existed off of for almost 200 years.
Yeah, that's when they originally sent the tribes to the reservation. The land they couldn't, it wasn't good to grow stuff on.
All of the reservations were deliberately barren.
And so they said, look, you sent us here. If you don't give us any food, we're going to die, and they gave them some food aid. And they're doing the same thing in Palestine. They're sending Israel bombs, but then dropping off a little bit of aid so the survivors have something to eat.
They're crushing people with those.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, they're shooting people who are going to collect aid. Like, three food aid organizations have had to pull out because they're directly targeted. Like the sniper shot and the rocket shot literally shows a blown hole right in the logo of both of these bands, the World Central Kitchen and this other aid room.
Yeah.
It's like there's no way, and they're in what they said was a safe zone.
You know what shook me to the core? You know what's really close to Gaza? You know what's not even 50 miles from Gaza?
A lot of oil.
No. Golgotha.
What's that?
Bro, that's the island, Skull Island, where they executed Jesus.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, it's a
like
where
the cross of Jesus is literally like 50 miles of where this
and that's the point. That's what the original Assassin's Creed game shows. Assassin's Creed 1. It's since, and the Christians did it 1,000 years ago. They started the Crusades, where it's white people. So what happened was Jesus was a Palestinian, right? It was called Israel back then, but the descendants converted to Islam. You know, the descendants of the Jews in Jesus' time, 600 years later after Muhammad, converted mostly into Muslims, but there were still Christians and Jews that lived there, and they all lived in harmony. You know, and then around the year 1000 AD, and a little bit before, and for hundreds of years after, so the Romans, they they made this Christianity in the the Council of the Nicene or whatever in like 200 AD, and then they used that to colonize all these different regions and suppress people and make them believe that they have a better afterlife if they just stay meek and humble and serve the empire. And then so after generations of that, these Christians from Europe who were born and raised in Europe, their ancestors were always European, they're Christian now, and so they see that as their holy land because that's where Jesus is from. That's where Jesus was from. So they went there to conquer the Holy Land because they felt like as Christians, just because they're Christian, they have a right to rule this land and not be the English people who them.
You know, what's crazy about it is like even if that happened a long time ago, even in
that's my point. It's still happening today. The Prime Minister Netanyahu's not his birth name. He's a Polish New Yorker. He was born in New York from a Polish descent, and he migrated. Yeah, most of Israeli citizens are Europeans and Americans, white bloodline who never had any ancestry in that region who are coming there to colonize. They're literally coming there, taking over, and it's the exact same thing. And that's the thing. That's the good thing about cell phones. They didn't have cell phones when the United States did this to the native people here, but we have cell phones now, and we're seeing them. The United States is the only reason this is happening. The government of the United States sending billions of dollars, hundreds of thousands of rockets and missiles over to Israel without and the United States taxpayers literally fund the Israeli government. Like their government is funded by our taxpayers.
That last bill that they made, that was like, what is it, like 11 billion or something?
So this guy Javi was saying the Seminoles still have power in Florida, but he's saying even if they call themselves Seminoles, they're white people who have co-opted the name by marrying in and killing off the native people in the family. But now he's saying the higher blood percent. I don't know any truth of that, whatever. But
how pure blood quantum is going to be if they're based on something that was initiated as a change?
What does that mean?
CDIB, the Indian roll number. When people had an Indian roll, they were assigned different names, and they were relocated. All of those people, like I haven't met a tribe yet that wasn't. There was tribes of resistance like the Modoc and the Lakota, Dakota, Nakota, the seven Oyate Shakaween, the seven Council Fires of Peace. But it's like they all were eventually defeated. Like literally, they gathered them all up. They gathered up all of the indigenous leaders and pipe carriers and executed them.
So he said, I'll send you a picture of Chief Osceola. He ain't white, but
I'm not claiming all tribes are white and there's not Puritans left. Like I have an 86-year-old pureblood grandma.
So wait, hold on. He's saying they have power in Florida. From my understanding, Florida is run by a very Republican, right-wing government of white people. So I don't. What power do you claim he has in Florida? This Seminole chief.
Is there sovereignty? Do they have their own currency? They have to have their own regulated, circulated currency to be a sovereign governance of their own.
That's currency sovereignty. That's a real.
Yeah, like do you have? That's one of the five. There's five things you have to be of power, but do they have their own currency?
He said they can control the gambling and education here. I doubt that because I actually heard that the right wingers have been changing the school books in Florida to not talk about race theory and to whitewash the crimes of the United States. I've seen a lot of stuff about that.
There's a lot. Yeah, the whitewashing is like rationalizing, synthesizing. Yeah.
So I doubt that this tribe controls the education of Florida when I know Florida education has specifically been called out for whitewashing history. But one
point still stands is does the tribe have its own regulated currency?
He said, you doubt wrong, I've been here all my life. Well, he said...
I'm not here doubting anything.
He says the point still stands. Do they have their own regulated currency? But one more thing I wanted to bring up. So that was the 2 points. Having a certain percentage of representation in the government and... Oh, shit, I sat on a damn tree sap somewhere.
Oh, shit.
That always happens out here. But, or... No, not or. And, you know, a certain position that can only be filled, you know, by natives from different tribes. You know, no white people in the Indian Board of Affairs, you know, or make a new organization.
Well, that's just it. It's like the BIA isn't going to be changed anytime soon.
Right.
Like, that's just it. Right. The BIA is so outdated that, like...
So it has to be a new organization.
Yeah, one that has more transparent communication instead of being elusive and outdated and regulated by something that's not the tribal governance.
Right, and so it has to be something that is exclusively regulated by the tribal government, a coalition of tribal government.
All of the tribes, yeah. Kind of like the NDN at the Dapple XL protest in Standing Rock. Like, was it 386 tribes or 108 out of the 508 out of the 580? Like, they unified all the tribes for peaceful protest, but I haven't seen it done for their own governance.
So the third thing would be a veto power. You know, an indigenous council would have the right to veto any law made by the rest of the population.
Well, that's just it. It's like the only way they can do that is by
taking over the government.
No, they've been given the illusion of that through the prisoner of war camps. The reservations literally are the only places where tribal members, quote unquote, have power or have authority. But even then, it's delegated by the Bureau of Indian Affairs because they're all on borrowed land. It doesn't matter if you have graves there. It doesn't matter if your family has been there for hundreds of years. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has taken just about all of the land. And that's the truth of the matter. That was the point of everything. The reason I asked him is if they had their own federally regulated currency would mean that chief has power. Because the currency that he gives people is a representation of his word. That's something that's really important in a lot of tribal governance. Like, if they have their own federally regulated currency, it's a representation of sovereignty and association of the tribe. Like, you don't have tribal association if you haven't been given it's like how do they call those things whenever you've done a good deed and they give you a token of appreciation? It's like an award. Yeah. It's like tribally regulated currency isn't about the value of it. It's about being federally regulated award of. It's like being given an award of valor.
Okay, so here's what he's been saying.
Yeah, I'm curious if he said anything about regulated currency.
He said, look up Chief Osceola and Ron DeSantis, governor of Florida. He said, no, they use American dollar. And somebody said, Javi must be a Florida. and then Javi says, on the reservations here, they have their own police and hired counsel and all. Yeah, they have their own police on reservations out west too, but that doesn't mean they have power. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day, they still have to submit to United States law. You know, the federal government has jurisdiction over all their land.
Tribal officers are just an extension of the federal government. They aren't their own government.
So the tribal officers are run by some federal thing.
Yeah. If you look it up, that's why all the reservations are asking for more officers. They're like, we're so understaffed on all of these reservations. We don't have enough tribal officers, and the tribal officers are an extension of the federal government, so they have to ask for more federal aid. It's not an extension of their own police force. No, it's a representation of the federal government policing the tribal members. And it's kind of like, they have you thinking the reverse of it, like it's an extension of you.
And so this next comment he said before you said, I think this is him just trying to make an anecdote, trying to say something that doesn't mean anything, right? Because this is what he says. He says, when they have their yearly meeting with our governor, the Seminoles wear their full headgear and all inside the Florida House of Representatives, just because they're wearing native dress.
He's talking about the Council of Elders. Like every reservation is supposed to have a Council of Elders. They're like the purebloods, the 4x4s, and there aren't that many of them left, and a majority of them are in their, I don't know, 60s to 90s. So once those 4x4s are gone, your extension to the federal government that represents you, known as the tribal council, is not going to be a representation of you. When those people are gone, it's going to be replaced by the federal government. That has nothing to do with your tribe. And that's what happened everywhere else. It happens everywhere else. And then they add more seats to the tribal council so they can further erode the connection between the people of the reservation and the leadership. It's like it happens at every reservation. And if it hasn't happened yet, it's going to within the 7th generation.
So, yo, what's up, Almighty Ben? So this next comment, you know, it comes from a place of ignorance as well, because
that's okay.
Because what he says is, okay, come here and commit a crime on Seminole land and see where you go. That doesn't mean anything, because what you're saying is that they're an extension of the federal government. Of course, if you commit a crime, the federal government's gonna prosecute you with their authority, no matter where you are in America, you know. But that's not the point. The point is, it's not run by the tribe itself. It's run by the federal government.
Yeah, exactly.
And so they don't have power over their officers and what their officers can and can't do, and what, all their procedures and all that.
Circles back to the 90% of the federal population for the female prisons are Native American women. And that's literally because